Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. I'm Robin Wigglesworth. I'm the US Markets Editor at the Financial Times. And here is also Joe Lonsdale, my almost long-term sparring partner. We've done this 3 years in a row now, I think.
I believe so.
Yeah, exactly. So in that time, he's had 2 kids, which is exciting. I've got a few more gray hairs, but you'll get them soon as well, don't worry. I want to start off talking a little bit about a subject that I'm interested in, selfishly, and it's basically the future of public markets. I mean, clearly we've had a lot of big tech IPOs this year, and you brought a company to the market last year, which I think is now an $8 billion company, Garden, and things seem to be optimistic. People think, Pinterest and are doing well, and we have Slack and other companies coming. But yet the number of listed companies in the United States of America have basically halved since 1996 to 4,000 companies. And I was wondering why that was, and whether it's actually something we should worry about, or whether it's just basically we need to have a slightly more sort of new understanding, interpretation of the division between private and public companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think my thinking has definitely evolved on this, probably going from an entrepreneur to being more of an investor these days. As an entrepreneur, especially after all these, the new stocks and all the different rules for being public, yeah. I'm very sympathetic to CEOs who don't want to have to deal with that. At the same time, there's probably a lot of really healthy discipline in terms of what you have to do when you're public, and it does seem a little bit unfair that the non-accredited investors can't participate anymore in the growth of these companies. I think these companies would tend to go public, Amazon or Microsoft or whatever, and still have 100x potential. I have not seen very many things go public in the last 5 years, I'd say. Possibly have a 100x potential, usually not even a 10x potential anymore in the public markets, which seems really unhealthy. I think there's probably a good discipline where things should be going public more. These days, there's a big debate among late-stage investors, like, what do you have to do to be ready to go public? And some people say you have to have everything in order, it has to be perfect. You have to make sure you're not going to miss your quarters. You have to really know it well. And there's other later-stage investors that have made arguments that I'm sympathetic to, which actually probably does make sense to just be a little more aggressive. Public market investors are pretty savvy. They're going to be able to understand that things are a little bit messy, but it's still a great company. So hopefully we're going to be able to get some more of these companies out sooner, is my view now.
But I remember reading stories about how going public was this massive milestone in companies, something that people aspire to, the founders aspire to, and now people treat it as this massive headache.
Exactly.
And basically openly mock the process.
Well, it is a headache. If you can get capital for free, it's basically adding a lot of different people to watch you and comment on you. I mean, just a lot of companies I'm involved with, the CEOs really like the fact that whether or not they close this giant deal is really under the radar. And if it gets delayed for 3 or 4 months, they're not going to have to explain it to everybody. So I think it definitely is an extra burden if you're public, and there definitely is money if you're private.
But but how will that change then? I mean, clearly, the VC industry is not going to disappear. Clearly, there's a lot of money chasing interesting companies. Or should we even care, really?
I think that's actually a better question. I think, so you think of companies, I've been involved for many years with something called Zambado, which is one of the leading secondary exchanges. And a lot of these companies are trying to restrict things so people aren't allowed to get liquidity, but for the ones that are not restricted, it's very, very liquid these days. There's a very active market. A lot of the people, whether it's Fidelity or Wellington or all the types of players you'd expect to participate in the IPO and afterwards, they're participating in these later stage ones anyway. So it is becoming a lot more like the public markets in that regard.
So it's basically we're blending. I mean, what are the pros and cons of that? Is that a bad thing or a good thing, you think?
Well, I think
Over or underrated?
I think it's a very positive thing. Listen, I think the way the tech community works is when people have a big win, when you're part of a big win. If you're a young engineer, a young entrepreneurial person, you join someone else and you have a success, you take that money, and that money funds your ability to then build something yourself, or then build something with your friends. And that's why, in technology in general, and whether it's fintech or any other area, you get these very positive sum things where one win leads to another one, leads to another win. And part of that is being able to take the financial resources and use them for new things. You're taking the learnings first of all, but you need the financial resources to be able to take these risks, to be able to be starting a family or whatever you're doing, and also be able to be trying to build something new. So the fact that you can use secondary markets to get liquidity, that's a very positive thing.
Yeah. But I mean, should we do something? I mean, the lady from DC, there's been a lot of talk about encouraging companies, smaller companies, earlier in their life cycle to go public. But there's this thing that public markets is where Empire invests as well, and you don't want to lessen the restrictions, the disclosure rules, and things like that. Where do you think, ideally, if you could, when you talk to founders, what would be most helpful to make sure that more of them go public earlier?
Well, I mean, I guess I tend to be biased more towards liberty and people being able to make choices. I think having different types of markets that are public that have different rules where people can opt in to participate in them is probably a good thing overall. I think if something's public, there's certain basic disclosures you need, but I'd be hugely in favor of being able to have, a zone where you can go public without having to go do quite as much as what you have to do right now, and people know buyer beware. These guys are disclosing certain things, but they're not going to, go through a probe every time they have a quarter. Yeah, I'm definitely in favor of making more things available and letting people choose to participate in them or not. Obviously, you don't want scams going on, but I think there's a big gap between where we are now and where you could be without you still stopping all the scams.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's hard to avoid. Obviously, you're a co-founder of Palantir as well, one of those big companies we've talked about going public for a long time. 2019 was the year. Now it's 2020.
That's just because the bankers keep talking to their press, because it's all fake news.
Bankers don't leak to journalists. I would perish the thought.
No, it's all fake news because the bankers wanted to go public. Yeah. I wanted to go public too. I was 21. It was 15 years ago when we started it, and it's doing extremely well actually. It's growing very fast right now. I'm still an advisor. I'm very proud of the team. But the big thing that shifted that was really neat in the government is about 2 or 3 years ago, after a bunch of fighting, we finally got a lot of the way the DOT's procuring to be just really truly open and competitive in certain areas. And so Palantir has won some of its biggest contracts ever in the last few years because it's been able to compete openly, which is, once you get a meritocracy, Silicon Valley is able to run circles around most of what's going on in the belt around Virginia and Maryland, DC, but it needs to be opened up. So Palantir is doing great. I would like them to be public. My guess is it's going to be a few years.
Yeah, so they're not actually ready to go public.
I mean,
what needs to happen?
It's just a huge headache. Imagine every time, if they're public right now, every company has this. Peter Thiel, who was a Trump supporter, is a big shareholder there, and imagine they're going to get or not get a big contract, and everyone would know all the details and be talking about it. Like, that's probably, my guess is that's the last thing he wants to have to deal with, and the CARP wants to deal with, and so it's just, there's all sorts of reasons why it would just be a huge headache. Is my intuition. I do think it's the right thing to go public in the next few years, though, because at some point there are, I recruited a lot of the first 100 people who built that company, and a lot of them are my age, and they're buying homes, and they deserve liquidity at a fair price. So at some point, it's the right thing to do for people who built a company to take it public. And the other alternative would be to be a lot more transparent in the private markets and to help people get liquidity that way too. But I think going public is just the right way to do that.
Yeah, for that company that size. But that sounds, reading between the lines, that Peter wants to wait until after the presidential election, assumes that Trump won't be there.
He hasn't told me anything like that at all. He honestly hasn't. I just think that just like my own interpretation is that it would be, I could see how it could be distracting, as all of us could too, just seeing who's involved and seeing what they're doing. I think there's some really big contracts they're winning, and they're in very competitive situations. They're doing a great job on it. Their government and commercial business is growing fast, so I think they're doing fine. But I hope in a few years they decide to go.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the obviously things that Palantir does is, it's a data company that analyzes it better and smarter than most people. In a world where these are issues that are fairly controversial, but certainly becoming more controversial, how does Palantir fit in that? Could that become a risk factor for them?
Well, no, I think that's a great question. And again, I haven't run the company for 9 years, so they'd probably be annoyed that I'm talking about it a lot in public, even though they're my friends who are building it. But that was the key thing early on that we did build. Like, the point of the company was, how do you go in and how do you build information infrastructure that both gives people access to the information they need to make common sense decisions, but that also has really clear what the rules are and who's allowed to see what. So there's the idea of privacy and civil liberties was a feature of the company that we created to go in and do this. One of the things I was very personally concerned about, looking at what happened after 9/11, is we spent billions of dollars on these systems in the government that were not very sophisticated. And I mean, not to be facetious about it, but you imagine like Jack Bauer in the show 24, and there's going to be a terror attack, and there's this data here, and there's no access controls. Like, Jack Bauer is going to freaking get the data however he can and stop the bad guy, right? And that's actually like just what some of these people are going to do. And that's actually not. I mean, we do want to stop the bad guys, but we don't want that. We don't want a situation where people are just arbitrarily able to take data and do what they want with it. You want an infrastructure where it's really clear who's allowed to see what, how it works, what can talk to what, and where the people on top can see the rules and they can audit who's done what. I mean, that's how you make privacy and civil liberties work, is with better technology that then gives you that dynamism and gives you those rules. And so that was the point of the company, is to enforce privacy and civil liberties while still enabling people to stop the bad guys.
Yeah, but so basically, Palantir is kind of a white hat, anti-Jack Bauer data snooping company.
You
Is
said
that
it,
the,
not
the
me.
front page of the
Something
S1?
like that. It's a very cool mission-driven company, so I'm very proud of what we accomplished there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, VC also has a really interesting group of companies in its portfolio. I'd love to hear a little bit ones that you are most excited about. I know we all love our children equally, but there must be some of you
Well,
actually...
there's different areas, of course. I'm excited. I'd love to go mostly into the fintech things here with this crowd. I think if I were to say what's the other most exciting area, I think the question you have to ask, whether or not it's fintech or anything else, is what's possible now that wasn't possible 3, 4, 5 years ago. And I think that answer is still very clearly what's going on the bio-IT side in terms of what's going on and being able to intersect engineering and programming with biology and with the renaissance going on in biology. So just like there's one example of something that's pretty stealth right now is there's been companies that have started saving a lot of lives in blood cancer because you can take out white blood cells and program them when you put them back in, and they go and they kill the blood cancer. And right now these called CAR T stuff doesn't work against tumors because tumors have a way to basically turn off the white blood cells. They hijack the mechanism that our body uses to stop autoimmune disorders, so they exhaust the white blood cells. And it turns out that using all this new programming and being able to try things and play with molecular mechanisms, like it looks like we figured out how to stop tumors from doing that, so maybe we're going to be able to use it against tumors. That's one example, but there's just so many really cool things you can try and learn going on in the bio world. So I think that's the area where there's the most things right now that are possible that were not possible 5 years ago.
Oh, really? What other areas?
Well, I mean, even in fintech, there's a lot going on that really matters. My focus on fintech tends to be infrastructure. So I think, and even in bio as well, like when you're playing these things, like how do you own something that everyone's going to use to enable the innovations? And so I think there's a lot of things possible in data with insurance that weren't possible before, and that's actually something I'm really excited about in terms of adding value to the world. It just sounds like kind of a boring esoteric thing. What are you talking about in insurance? But what insurance data actually is it's something that allows you to align incentives in new ways to achieve new outcomes for society. So imagine you want to make a workplace safer. The way you basically, like all these companies that are maybe they're doing construction on the building outside when you walk in, they have to get workers comp insurance, and they have to pay a certain amount for workers comp insurance. Imagine there are practices insurance companies can watch with cameras and machine learning to know whether or not they're doing things safely or not. And so you basically could build in like cool machine learning. You can watch what they're doing. You could tell them you have to do these things, and we're going to adjust how much you're paying in insurance based on whether you do these things or not. And so suddenly you can actually affect behavior in a way that saves them money on their insurance if they're safer. And so basically it aligns interests using insurance and using data to do something smarter. That's just one small example, but there's thousands of things like this where you can use data to align incentives with insurance. And the insurance industry itself needs new tools to be able to do this. It's like these companies, whether it's Mutual of Omaha or whatever, they're not historically they weren't big data companies, they weren't super high tech companies. So I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities right now to build infrastructure. We have a company called Socotra that's building some really cool infrastructure for this. There's a lot of things going on in that space that I think are quite cool.
Yeah, I'm always kind of fascinated, weirdly, by like really boring but important areas that people always underestimate. It usually attracts less interest in investment because it's just not as sexy. Are there any other areas that we can see actually you think technology will have a meaningful impact? Especially if it's finance or finance adjacent, I'd be interested in.
Yeah, well, and finance, of course, is a tool to fix a lot of different industries. So I mean, I think healthcare finance is super interesting right now. A big question in healthcare is how we get it from 19% of our GDP down to maybe 13 or 14%. That would really benefit all of us because our government's basically bankrupt to entitlements. If you plot it out, it's an uncomfortable thing for anyone to think about because there are 13 times GDP in entitlement debt to Medicare and Medicaid. It's just pretty insane. And there's lots of ways in which you can use financing mechanisms to create incentives to save money that are positive. There's the most obvious one is the big data value-based care thing, where rather than paying fee for service, you create incentives where you pay in bundles, and then the people at the provider are forced to think about preventative things they could do and ways they can use data to prevent you from having to need certain things. Like when you get a knee surgery, there's certain actions they can take to make it less likely you come back in and need to fix it in a really expensive way. And if they're paying no matter what for the next year, it changed their behavior and forced them to do things. So there's always, I think, financing mechanisms in healthcare. There's just tons of things there that are really interesting right now.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on the whole of the Berkshire Hathaway, JP Morgan, Amazon tie-up?
I don't know enough about what they're doing.
No,
I think
neither do I.
I've met a lot of people who have a lot of hope. They tell me that they're going to do something really important and useful. But there's so many big areas to go after in healthcare. Whether it's there's just so many areas of inefficiency and waste where there's cartels or there's special interests that are kind of making much more money than they should. The biggest cartel is just the providers in general are a very big influence that a lot of the not to go into politics, I'll keep it nonpartisan, but a lot of the politics in our country are around who should pay for medicine, and like everyone deserves to have medicine paid for, and these people want to pay this way, these people want to pay this much, and that's just the silliest conversation, frankly, on both sides, because the payers are not the ones making the margins, the providers are the ones making the margins. Even if we're going to pay for everyone, we have to make it more efficient, or we're not going to have enough healthcare. So it's just all these, there's like all these subtle things once you dig into it that are pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, one thing that staggers me as a European and somebody from Norway is that, whatever you think was the optimal system, the outcomes in the US are terrible compared to how much resources.
We have all these crony cartels who have taken over, whether it's the PBMs or the providers or other areas. Then we need to basically break them and let market forces function again. Is the high level.
Maybe this is the PayPal mafia should ride again then.
Where there's a lot of smart people building in this area right now, and there's a lot of bipartisan things going on to fix it. So I'm actually pretty optimistic on healthcare.
Okay. One of the other companies you're invested in is Blend.
Yes.
It's a startup in the home lending space. And one thing I'm interested, obviously, the property market is hardly going down the drain or anything, but there does seem to be a bit of a softening. How will that affect that company? But where do you see it kind of going in the next 5 years' time?
Sure. Well, I was with Stan Druckenmiller this morning, who thinks there's a very good chance of 50 basis point cut in July. So I mean, maybe the rates coming down again will make it not soften as quickly. We'll see what happens there. But I think the line is that we're probably going to have the cut as long as Trump doesn't keep trying to bully them, because if he does, then they might push back and not do it, which would be not good. Anyway, the basic, so Blend is kind of the leading infrastructure for the space. So if you go to like Wells Fargo or a US bank or like 40 other banks, they use Blend to do the mortgage process. And so once again, I think that's the real value of these industries, is owning the infrastructure and enabling things. Because once you're owning that point, you can also like start giving people insurance, and you can layer in a bunch of other things there, which they're starting to do very successfully. So I think Blend's in a fine position because it's just going to own a big piece of the industry. And I think the question is not what happens 6 months from now, but 5 years from now, if they keep growing, keep doing what they're doing, it's going to be a giant company. So I think they haven't announced a giant round they just raised. They're doing really well.
Yeah. What about Adipar? I mean, that's the last company you founded yourself, though, right? Yeah.
Well, before I started investing, I built Palantir, Adipar, and OpenGov for the 3 companies, and I'm still chairman of Adipar and OpenGov. And Adipar is doing great. Adipar has $1.5 trillion on the platform, and we're powering a lot of investment advisors and family offices and banks. And there's a lot of things Adipar is doing to empower the investment advisors. We had a new mobile app come out today, which is pretty neat. But the thing I'm most excited about there, frankly, is they also have a broker-dealer where they're starting to kind of give the ability for advisors to give views of the alternative investment world to their clients, and then to help them drive products and things through that, which I think is pretty neat. Yeah,
but I mean, you're not as enthusiastic about the robo world, right?
Well, I think
you want to be a service provider to them rather than.
I don't think the robo world's going to capture a lot of margins, nor should it, because most robo is commodity. I'm sure there are ways to make it not a commodity that people who are really smart are figuring out, and we are thinking about some of those, especially in areas like alternatives. But I think, in general, like it doesn't make sense for people to pay a lot of margin for basic robo stuff long term. That should be competed away. There should be like a couple people like Fidelity and BlackRock that are managing trillions of dollars with very tiny robo margins that should probably own most of that, and most of the other ones, it's going to be tough unless they have some other way to differentiate themselves. Is my bias.
Yeah, I mean, so I was talking to the CB Insights people as well, and they said actually their data showed that you'd actually been stepping down a little bit your investments in some insurance tech, fintech recently. Is that true? And if so, why? Are there areas you just think are saturated?
I think the question comes back to what's newly possible now. We have a bunch of these big wins with financial infrastructure. I haven't seen too many new areas where there's new infrastructure to try to own, so I'm very bullish on Blend and Adipar, and Qualia and title insurance is growing really fast in owning that area. We helped launch that out of our firm, and I think Socotra and insurance tech is great. There's not as many new areas of insurance. I mean, Socotra we did last year, so we're still doing some new things here. If I find the new infrastructure area to go after, then I definitely will. Right now, there's more new things in bio and logistics and other areas that we're focused on. But I think the thing they might not be measuring is there's a lot of healthcare companies or logistics companies that are using finance as a way to align incentives and to do things differently. So I think fintech's a funny word. It's not really clear what fintech is. There's a lot of areas where fintech now is intersecting with a lot of these other industries.
Yeah, that's interesting. But you said you feel that basically, is this a broader view among VCs that fintech, broadly speaking, is less interesting than some other areas? Is this a bit of a shift?
Oh, I don't think so. I think there's still a lot of, I'm still seeing a lot of great companies that are doing clever things in finance. I mean, I think one of the big trends that's still not nearly done yet is there's all these areas of our economy where banks themselves should be playing in, and they're not. So one of the companies that we helped launch a couple years ago, we launch things out of our fund these days, so we get to still be entrepreneurs, is called Shogun. and my friend Anthony Goen, he's running that, and they're helping contractors give loans, and that's growing extremely fast. It's just this thing where like the banks should have been working with smaller contractors to empower them and help them give loans to their consumers, and it turns out there's just a giant part of our economy where there's not really good credit available in the right way, and he just found that, and he's growing faster. So I think there's still a lot of things like this where the banks, because of regulation especially, are not able to do things, and people that's still a good theme to bet on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very happy we managed to have an entire conversation about this without really talking about anything crypto yet.
Yes, I'm happy about that too.
Yeah, okay, shall we just leave it then? Does anybody want to talk about crypto? Probably. I mean, what do you think? I mean, I hear so many times about this. Now, I feel when the banks get involved, it feels like slightly uncool kids that want to seem hip and say, oh, we've started a blockchain project. And you know it's just going to die and it's not going to go anywhere.
I think that when you start something because it's blockchain, or you say you're really excited about blockchain and that's tied to the founding of your company, that's probably not a good idea. Yeah. I think that blockchain is something that group companies like Blend and others are going to be able to use. I was at the Hill yesterday with actually talking to a really smart senator who's a doctor, and has a bunch of ideas. And after we were talking and people had left, he kind of whispered to me, I have this really cool idea for how healthcare finance should actually be on a distributed ledger. And
so this senator was pitching you in an
investment pitching me on,
idea?
well, no, it wasn't an investment. It was like, this is how it should work longer term. And he's actually a very clever guy, and I think he's right. I think there are ways distributed ledgers actually do enable certain things in healthcare finance that are really smart. But it's a sort of thing that it probably wouldn't be a startup. It'd probably be something that already existed that was then adding that in, is my view. I think that's a big mistake with blockchain, is it's not a seed investment. It should be like a Series C strategy. It's like build something that's actually useful first, and then think about how distributed ledger plays into it, because you have to first capture a valuable process. That's my view.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, we're running out of time, and I actually do want to do this lightning round of overrated, underrated. First one, privacy.
Oh, overrated. Do I get to say why?
Yes, you get. Okay.
I mean, I think first of all, like, it's just like an excuse for Europe just to fine all of our companies. I think the regulators there have become a joke, and it's very similar to like the populists against the banks here, where like they're not actually worried about privacy. They're just worried about, they just want something to complain about. And there's not. Listen, I don't own any of Facebook or Google or these companies, but I think they provide us all value thanks to the fact that they have this data. And I just don't even understand what they would be doing that would be hurtful in those areas. So I guess I just don't understand. I understand the issue from like a government civil liberties perspective when it comes to like, I don't want the government being able to know certain things about me. China freaks me out.
Why is it more worrying that the government knows stuff about you than Facebook?
Because they have the power to do things with force against me, whereas Facebook doesn't. So that's my view. I mean, in China, I think it is terrifying. Like when you're walking and you get a jaywalking ticket from a camera, they not only know who you are and know to send it to you, they know how to send it to the place you're staying, not the place that you're. It doesn't matter what you say your address is to the government. They like watch you all around the city and know where you go home at night, and that's what they'll send that does scare me a little bit with a totalitarian state aspect. But I think the general corporate side, I guess maybe I just haven't been exposed to what's negative there.
Yeah. AI.
Very bullish on AI. I think
Is it underrated though? I mean, I feel everybody's bullish.
Well, I think it's underrated. Well, it's overrated from like when you go to the Pentagon now, if you want to get something funded, you have to call it AI, and that's really annoying. It's like, I mean, it's just like there's all these, and China and other places too. So I think that part of it's really stupid, but I think that it's underrated in terms of how positive it is for society. I think it's going to bring us a lot of prosperity in the next 10 or 20 years. There's this general fear of AI with jobs and everything, and I think people are getting that completely wrong. The part of AI that might be scary is that eventually it replaces, like eventually if you think AI can exceed people and you can build a person with AI and then it can build itself and it has the singularity thing, like that's just existential crisis for humanity that may happen in 50 or 100 years. And I agree that's kind of freaky. It's like this like messianic thing that's, you know, it's like the new religion of the Silicon Valley people or whatever. That part's really scary. But I think the next 10, 20, 30 years, the applications of AI, when it's still really far away from this singularity thing, I think they're extremely positive and very beneficial for everyone in society. So I think the amount of wealth we can create for the least well off with AI is underrated.
Okay, so AI underrated, singularity also.
Singularity is maybe pretty terrifying. Yeah.
The PayPal mafia. Well, you think you guys are underrated? I mean, or do people talk too much about all the people that came out of PayPal? Has this become a thing that it really isn't?
I mean, there are a ton of talented people out of PayPal, and they seem to keep having really big wins, and I've learned a lot from. I was one of the young guys there. I don't really count as PayPal Mafia. I was in the big picture. I was 19 years old at the time and just an intern there, but they have built a lot of really great things. So I'm generally pretty bullish on them.
IBM.
I think it's still overrated because it's just we've probably competed with them 9 or 10 times, and they don't attract the very best computer science engineers anymore. And yeah, no, I mean, I think the line I said on TV that if you're bullish on IBM, that's being bearish on American innovation because you're assuming that it's okay for a company that doesn't know how to innovate to run industries. So I'm pretty extremely bearish on IBM in general.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, I can go into that in as much detail as people want. Like every single time we've come up against them, we've crushed them. Watson was, yeah. Anyway, it's not way overrated.
Okay, so if you've got a sell rating on IBM, then what do I?
I mean, the market's finally realized this about 2 years ago. So whether or not they may have a very strong, I think they have a great sales culture. Obviously, they have a great sales culture. They might have some very strong services cultures and things they do there. So whether or not the market's already knows they're not very good, so it's hard to tell what the stock should be priced at.
Well, Tesla's share price?
That's a hard one. I wouldn't bet against Elon. So I think it was clearly overvalued for a while, but after the fall here, I wouldn't bet against Elon.
Okay. And finally, I was talking to some colleagues about this cheesecake.
I guess underrated.
Underrated.
Everyone's too afraid to eat dessert these days, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's very true. Well, I'll bring that back to the office. Well, Joe, it was great to talk to you again.
Thanks,
Thank you very
Robin.
much for listening to us.